to another exciting adventure into art. Today we're going to talk about Cubism. It's been considered to be the most influential art movement of the 20th century. And the term is used in association with a wide variety of art produced in Paris or near Paris during the 1910s and throughout the 1920s. A retrospective of Paul Cézanne's paintings had been held at the Salon des Étonnés of 1904. His current works were displayed at the 1905 and 1906 Salon, followed by two commemorative retrospectives after his death in 1907. So Paul Cézanne was kind of all over the place at this point. What he did was he broke space and perspective. He flattened his forms, and he didn't get caught up in the descriptions. He's known widely to have used a flat brush and a lot of mark making in order to do that. And this is why he's considered to be the father of modernism. Because if you look closely at this particular still life, he's breaking the edges of where the table or the lines of perspective should essentially meet up in space. And he's doing that so that he can focus more on making a picture or a design of something rather than a facsimile of what he sees. Remember, this is around the time that photography has become very ubiquitous, and so the function of the painter has really changed in that they can take greater liberties in terms of really pursuing and investigating what the elements and principles can do for them. And here we have a very influential landscape painting of a quarry cliffside. So Paul Cézanne was very influential, and we'll see a little bit later on how so. But what I've got on the left here is a Cézanne, and then of course a Georges Braque on the side there. And that'll become important in a second. So what did Cézanne do? Cézanne changed his styles often. He changed his painting habits throughout his career. He was very devoted to repeating the same subject matter, but in different methods. He used shapes by breaking down their geometry. He used value and a light source that appear flattened for the most part. And he skews perspective and space to break up the picture plane. There's a great quote that Picasso said, my one and only master, Cézanne, was like the father of us all. And so Picasso around this period was, going through a lot of phases in his work, a blue period, a red period, etc. And this is around, shortly around and before he was seeing these Cézanne images displayed in Paris. Oh, and in particular, that painting, Boy with a Pipe, sold for $104 million in 2004, and that was more than any other painting it ever sold. So in Cubist artwork, objects are analyzed. They're broken up, they're reassembled in an abstracted form. Instead of depicting the objects from a single viewpoint, the artist will depict the subject from multiple viewpoints in order to represent the subject in a greater context. And in the spring of 1904, Georges Braque visited the studio of Pablo Picasso to look at his work Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, the Women of Avignon. He was really impressed with what he saw, and Braque very quickly befriended Picasso. And in the following years, Picasso and Braque were essentially inseparable. As Braque recalled, we were like mountain climbers roped together. So the two artists worked very closely, so much so that their works from this period are sometimes very, very difficult to tell apart. So Picasso and Braque forged this relationship that was part intimate friendship, part rivalry, and part two-man excursion into the unknown. These artists were constantly in each other's studio. They were scrutinizing each other's work. And what they did is they challenged, they motivated, and they encouraged each other. Picasso has a quote that says, "Almost every evening, either I went to Braque's studio or Braque came to mine. Each of us had to see what the other had done during the day. So throughout this artistic collaboration, Picasso and Braque invented Cubism, a new style of painting that did shatter all of the traditional forms of artistic representation. So in addition, Picasso and Braque experimented with pasting colors and printed pieces of paper into their paintings. So Picasso is actually credited with invented collage, with his 1912 work Still Life with a Chair, while Braque is actually credited for inventing a different kind of collage called papier collé, or pasted paper, with another still life fruit dish and glass. So the difference between collage and papier collé is very subtle. Papier collé refers exclusively to the use of paper and only paper, while collage might incorporate other media and other components. So essentially, you could say that they co-created collage as we know it today. So here we have an early work of Georges Braque, of a woman, and you see he's very influenced by Cézanne in this particular piece. And then just 2 years later, he is just fracturing the entire picture plane to create a cubist space that has become widely influential. Paul Cézanne used the fragmented space and ambiguous forms, and of course geometric shapes as well. But second to the influence of the Cubist movement was African art, particularly African masks. They paved the way stylistically for the development of Cubism. Specifically, Picasso's interest was sparked by Henri Matisse when Matisse showed him a mask from the Dan region of Africa. William Rubin, he was the former director of the Department of Painting and Sculpture at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. He sums up Picasso and Braque's relationship with a quote where he says, "The collaboration between Picasso and Braque is unique in the history of art for its intensity, its duration, and its generative impact. No other modern style was the simultaneous invention of two artists in dialogue with each other. In the years of their association, Picasso and Braque not only produced a number of exceptionally great works, they created a visual language that could and would be used by artists widely divergent aesthetic, literary, and political concerns." So Picasso and Braque's relationship kind of epitomizes the attraction of opposites. They were very, very different people. Braque's father was a house painter and decorator who made sure that his son learned some skills of his trade. And Picasso's father was actually an academic artist, an academic painter, who gave his son professional drawing lessons, very classical in technique. Braque was tall, reserved, a very systematic Frenchman. His artistic practice was dictated by reason and balance. He was very, very private, and Braque generally shunned the limelight and remained married to the same woman his entire life. Very differently, Picasso was a short, egotistical, outspoken, and unpredictable Spanishman. He never stuck to one woman or painting style for a prolonged period of time. He was hailed as pretty much the first celebrity artist, and Picasso reveled in a very, very public status. He loved it. He loved the limelight, but despite their very, very different backgrounds and temperaments, both Picasso and Braque complemented each other, and they contributed to a realization of a very common vision with their creation and invention of Cubism. So here we have a Pablo Picasso collage, and then some Georges Braque works. Now, Picasso and Braque would experiment with all kinds of approaches to drawing and painting. And one could argue in art history that that because Picasso was given the most fame in his respective area, he was the one that invented Cubism. However, it's really widely considered that they were both equally responsible for it, and influential. So we have a couple of various artists who are considered Cubists working at the same period, a little bit after Georges Braque and Picasso, and alongside, of course. And Cubism's influence was actually really far-reaching. It was more than simply just in the visual arts. A movement actually changes all of the artistic and creative practices. So early 20th century literature was actually changed by people like Gertrude Stein, William Faulkner, Guillaume Apollinaire, where things like multiple perspectives and disjointed narratives were used. So, Cubist elements like repetition, abstract language, and multiple narrators were pulled directly from that. So, music, architecture, and design definitely were interpreting the Cubist ideas in an alternative media. So, that brings us to our assignment, which is a Cubist drawing. And these are two student works drawn in the Cubist style. So, what you'll be doing is, just to review, next to the rejection of the traditional linear perspective, Cubist drawing and painting showcase the use of multiple or contrasting vantage points, so different perspectives. Analyzing the human figure or an object into a multitude of small facets, artists would push for the idea of totality within their works. This notion was achieved by the analysis of an object from every possible angle and then the fusion of the different points into one drawing or painting. This process of viewing the world rejected not only the traditional three-dimensional tools such as perspective, the use of high contrast or shading known as chiaroscuro, but focused on the intellectual idea of form as well. So in class, you'll be using the form and visual language of the Cubist to create a still life drawing in the Cubist style. You'll be shown a few methods in order to do this in a demonstration, and you'll work on tone paper with charcoal, white chalk, and two neutral colored pencils, things that might be in browns, ochres, or sienna, any fall color essentially. You may be encouraged to use ink, gesso, and collage in that exercise. Your homework will be using the exact same approach, but with any subject you choose. You may opt into using additional color if you like, or ink wash for this drawing. And you'll be awarded points based on your craftsmanship, your adherence to the Cubist approach, your finish, your composition, your value range, and your line sensitivity. That therein is the conclusion of the Cubist lecture.